Hello everybody, happy to see you. Thank you for joining me today on what I've felt like is probably going to be a fairly hotly argued topic, I guess. I've been slightly nervous about this one for some reason. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's because I feel like its content could feel personal to a lot of our viewers. But I, as always, am really looking forward to seeing what you share with me through the comments section, what your opinions are, what your thoughts are on this topic. Now, to give you a little bit of context, I grew up with a helper who I felt very connected to. In fact, my book that I wrote, which was a local bestseller called The Local Immigrant, it has a whole chapter on my helper and her role in my life and my subsequent reconnection with her a few years ago. That was quite special, having searched the whole world for her and then finding her. And so there is a context to it that I'm interested about, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But here's the thing: the other day, a friend shared with me that on a local radio station, a local Chinese radio station, there was a comment made by one of the listeners who had called in, and he had said basically he had taken his kids to school in his car with the helper, and then on the way home, having dropped the kids at school, he felt very awkward about where the helper was supposed to sit in the car, because he felt that the front seat was reserved for his wife and the back seat made it look like he was her driver. Now, this for me was a really interesting thought, because it's not something I ever would have considered. I mean, in the UK I drive, I had a car, and my wife had a car as well, but if we'd go out, we were never fussed about who sat in the front or who sat in the back. It was always it would be strange if there was two of us and one would sit in the back and one would sit in the front, and so we would always have if there was two of us, there'd always be in the front, unless it was a kid. Obviously you can't sit in the front, but it just made it really interesting for me to think that there is a whole mindset over the idea of status and how you are perceived by other people, particularly when it comes to a helper in the car, and particularly when it comes to driving. It's just another example of how varied our cultures can be, and how varied my culture that I grew up in is to the culture that my parents grew up in and that I live in now. And so I found that to be really interesting, and then it got my head going, as you can imagine, about helpers and their role in society here in Singapore, and the way that they're treated in society here in Singapore. For example, at some condos there are signs saying that helpers are categorically not allowed to use any facilities, not allowed to use the pool. I heard recently of a friend's helper who pretty much got chased out of the pool by a security guard because she was sat on the edge of the pool with her feet in decent attire. So she had long sleeve rash vest on, and so she didn't look like she was kind of being inappropriate or anything like that. And she had her feet in the pool, and she was looking after the kids from the family, and she was essentially chased out of the pool for being a helper, for not being a resident, not being the employer. And I just found this really uncomfortable. And I did a little bit of digging, because I realised I didn't think I'd seen any helpers using the gym or the pool in our condo, and the rules are the same here as well. Also recently there's been various different situations in the news where different employers have been abusive towards their employees, and so it just got me thinking and observing a lot more in daily life. Do we treat our helpers like family, or do we treat them like slaves? And now I know there's a huge gap in between where different people treat helpers in a different way, and there is probably a balance somewhere as well, because I understand and I acknowledge that they are employed, so they're employees. Not every helper is going to have that same connection with the family that makes them feel like family. I understand that too. And some helpers might not want to feel part of the family. I mean, a lot of helpers that we are aware of are away from their own family. Some of them have children, and so being integrated into another family could feel probably a little bit different, a little bit strange. And so I understand all of these things in between, but it still leaves me curious as to how we treat our helpers. On talking to some friends about this, it seems to be a very contentious idea, because even some of my friends' families, where maybe, say for example, their sibling who now has a helper and their parents don't get on as a result of the way that helpers are being treated. People are speaking up about it in one way or another. Now for me, as a family, the helper who we grew up with was very much part of our family. I wouldn't go as far as saying she was a close friend of my parents. It's not something that I witnessed, at least. It wasn't that I didn't see her and mum confiding in each other or anything like that. My parents didn't really spend a lot of, at least from what we could see, kind of adult time together with each other. Although, to be honest, we were the only Asian family in a very white neighbourhood in the UK, and to have a helper was very, very uncommon. And I do wonder what some of the locals thought about our family setup. Looking at it now through the eyes of an adult, I wonder whether some of them maybe have thought that my dad had 2 wives, for example. It would have been a very strange looking setup for them. But she was definitely part of the family. She would sit at the table with us when we ate together. She even came on family holidays together. I remember times where my parents categorically said that she was not working, that she was on holiday with us, although I know that she sort of tried to help out despite all of that. My grandma, who I've talked about a little bit either on this channel or on our main channel, Wanderlust, my grandma has a helper who is incredible. She's lovely. She would spend Christmas Day with us, and we try to make her as much of the family as possible. She sometimes removes herself for various different reasons. Sometimes she would say that inside's too cold if we've got the aircon on and she wants to go and sit on the balcony. She tries to wash up and we stop her from washing up, and then she kind of sometimes begs and says, please, I just want to help. And that's nice, it's slightly different that way. And I feel like we've got a good balance there. Definitely the way that she treats my grandma is with a lot of love and care. The way that my grandma treats her is also likewise with a lot of love, and I see that there's a closer connection than employer-employee in that scenario. And in contrast to my grandma's helper, we stayed at a friend of my parents' house here in Singapore a few years ago on holiday, and they had a helper who they said, look, the helper's yours, please let her help you out with things around the house. And we so appreciated what she did, and she really built a lovely relationship with our kids that we wanted to take her out for lunch one day, and we went out to the local hawker centre and we sat down together, and she outright refused to sit at the table with us. It made her feel very, very awkward to sit at the table with us, and in turn actually that made us feel a little bit awkward, because we didn't feel like we were her employer. We didn't feel it that way at all, and that we felt that there was more of a closer connection. And we realised just that their family culture, the way that they work with their helper, is different. And so I just want to ask the question, what do you do? Do you have a helper who's very much a separate part? Does you feel awkward about being seen with a helper? Do you make the helper more part of your family? Do they feel closer? Not so long ago, and this could be another topic to talk about altogether, but I'm just going to mention it here. A friend of mine described Singapore as a nation of orphans, strong words, who, because the children are being brought up by helpers and screens. Now, we've seen the government put in place screen controls very, very recently, and I as a parent really appreciate that. I think that's great guidelines. I actually think they're being a bit too generous with how much kids should be using screens, but it's a great start. But I can see that for sure around the island and around the country when we see families sitting around having dinner together. There is a very, very screen dominant situation. We see kids who are 4, 5, 6 years old and being fed still by the helper from cutlery to mouth. Our kids were using their own cutlery from a very young age, and I know that the cultures are different across from Europe to here, and I'm not placing any judgment on that situation. I'm just making an observation that helpers are so involved in family life. I would find it interesting if we didn't treat them closer as family. And I don't know, again, it's a cultural thing. We see bringing up children as a very, very personal thing as parents. Actually, looking back on my own childhood, my first 6 years, definitely our helper was a lot more involved in our life than I would probably want that to be at this stage of our lives with our kids. But again, my wife and I have a very different life to my parents when I was growing up, and so you only need to place yourself into those situations to be able to know that it's not a clear-cut situation. I hope you can see what I'm asking, what my thoughts are and my questioning is at this point. I'm just curious. How do you treat your helper? Is your helper a friend? Do you feel that the word slave is feeling a little bit uncomfortable for you? Do you feel like it is something that could be perceived that they are treated badly, yet you would say that it was fair to treat a helper that way? I'd be really interested to hear that. And how come there's this culture where helpers are definitely looked down upon? I'll give you an example. My younger sister, when she lived here in Singapore, she's married to a white guy, an English guy, and they had a very fair-skinned baby. And when she was here, my sister's got very British culture. She loved to get in the sunshine and tan and get darker. And I think a lot of people would have thought that she was or a lot of people did think that she was the helper of the baby, and so they would ask her that. And when they asked whether my sister was a helper of her kid, and she said no, she's the mum, they would respond in a very, very different way, in a way that almost made my sister feel a bit offended that she would be considered to be the helper. And I know my friend, American guy, has got a Filipino wife, and she regularly got mistaken as the helper for their baby, and she had a great way about it. She would just dismiss it and laugh and say it was all fine. But I don't know, I think it's really interesting to see assumptions that are made. And as you might be able to tell through the way that I'm talking about this today, that I'm still processing what I think about it. Actually, all of my videos I'm still processing it. That's why I put it out there. I want to know what you guys think and wonder whether you could share your thoughts and opinions as well. I've talked a long time about this topic today, and I would imagine there is a lot more to talk about, and I would really appreciate your thoughts and your ideas on it. So please do comment down below. You've probably noticed, if you have been on this channel before, I respond to everything I can and try to make as many comments back and process new thoughts about it as we go along. So, is your helper a family, or is your helper a slave? How do you have it? I'm really, really curious, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. Please subscribe. I've got some really interesting topics coming up as and when I get the chance to record them for you, and I'm very, very interested in what your thoughts are as a self-discovery for myself, to figure out my own home country, to be understand our culture, and to be able to understand all the things that I missed out when I was growing up, and to be able to fill in all those gaps. I love it. I'm really enjoying this journey. I hope you're enjoying it too, and we'll see you next time.